I feel like I've always been an abstract painter. I've always thought I'm looking at the work abstractly because of the way I learned how to paint. When I've used images or identifiable objects, I feel like I'm using them in a way to talk about abstraction a lot of the times. If we were looking at the paintings of these bees in a beehive, this is not about bees in a beehive. There's nothing you're going to learn about bees in a beehive. But then I'm taking it and trying to make abstract painting with it, trying to use these bees as almost a formal device to move you around the canvas and the raw canvas. My name is Laura Owens. I'm an artist. I'm sitting in my studio on Mission Road in Los Angeles. I grew up in a really small town in Ohio. I lived in the county seat, which meant it was where the courthouse and the jail and the county services were for the county, and that county seat, that town, was only 15,000 people. There was no movie theater. There was nothing going on there except for thrift stores, Kmart, football, corn. It was a really conservative town, so not fitting in there was pretty much just being a normal person. I felt so much better as soon as I got to art school. I went to CalArts graduate school after I graduated from Rhode Island School of Design, which I went to right after high school from Ohio. I actually entered CalArts when I was 21. I was a really young graduate student. LA was just really challenging because RISD had been very formalist, pretty conservative in its own right in terms of the painting department being kind of fueled by modernism, and I felt, though, at RISD that I did not get the full picture of what contemporary art was, so I applied to CalArts, which was almost like the exact opposite because they really started with in 1970s with Post Studio and sort of treating you as if you're already an artist, you're already a peer of theirs. I think one of the most important things that has been influential on me as an artist are just my peers and the context in which I've been making art for 25 years is like the people in proximity to me and just like how much there's an exchange going on of ideas. There is definitely something I'm trying to elicit. I guess one of the fallback ways I describe it is you're aware of yourself looking at a work of art. You've not like gone into the movie trance of sitting in a theater and you've lost your body. You're highly aware of your subjectivity and relationship, and that when you change your body and your point of view, things change, and that there are multiple points of view. Well, I've always been interested in thinking about painting as having a bigger, wider canon than what's like maybe was taught 50 years ago. So children's book illustrations, all these places that I think have just as much relevance included in their histories that inform what painting is or is a painting. When an artist uses a three-dimensional object, it reinforces the fact that the painting is a three-dimensional object. It gives you a lot of room to play with, like actual versus depicted, representation, it just gives you another layer to play with. I think, like the stretchers are an object, the canvas is an object, the paint is an object, the wheel is an object, the rocks are an object. These are all things that are just there's culturally like some received idea of a painting being a certain way, but like if you look at the Schwitter's painting or you look at the history of Dada, it's not the case. In 1992, 3, 4, I was using a lot of house paint, and when I got to LA, I went to Dunn Edwards Paint. I was really excited because it was a pretty high-level paint store in LA. And I also found Nova Color, which is another high-quality paint store in LA, both acrylic paint. Nova Color was like catering more to like artists and muralists. Dunn Edwards is just house paint, but also for trompe l'oeil artists doing murals, interior murals. They had a lot of like gloss and matte. They had a very, very matte paint Dunn Edwards did that I really loved because it was so delicate and so dry and it absorbed light so much. I'm just really, interested in heterogeneous surfaces and paint so that there's a lot of different things that the viewer is sort of putting together, like different modes of making on the same canvas. I would use anything. I don't care. I mean, I don't have like a bias towards like, oh, I need it to be goopy and soft. Oh, goopy and soft, dry and hard, I don't care. I'm just looking for more to add to the toolbox. All the silkscreen that happens here is pretty handmade because it's like usually the images are getting broken up into screens and we're talking about like how are we going to cut up the image and then we're not using always traditional silkscreen. Inks will use flash through the screen or we'll even mix flash and silkscreening together and use that for the red, especially to like bump up the magenta or something. Maybe we'll put a fluorescent pink in there instead.
My name is Michael Henry Hayden, and I have been at Laura's studio since 2013, and I work on everything from preparing the canvases to preparing the paints, screen printing, hand painting elements, collage elements, all sorts of things. There's a wide variety of paints that Laura uses, including flash, which is a vinyl-based paint, more traditional silk screenings that are acrylic-based, acrylic paints, oil paints, and then a variety of unconventional materials also. Sometimes, for instance, we'll mix colored sand into the wet paint or collage various fabrics, felt, or things onto the canvas. She usually has very specific ideas about what she wants, both materially and color-wise and things like that. And so it is often about knowing the texture that she's looking for and figuring out how to make the paint behave the way she's expecting. The impasto is a combination of materials. There's a sort of clay-based material that we mix with stand oil, which is thickened linseed oil, and also a material we get from a paint mixer in New York named Robert Doak, who makes a material he calls goop, which is safflower oil mixed with aluminum stearate. And that's something that we mix into the oil paint. We can mix them to this very thick consistency where they hold a peak and show a lot of detail. And we keep pretty detailed notes, or try to, of the different mediums we put into the paints. And when we make these tests, we'll write on the canvas what the proportions are so that we can come back to it later and see if cracks have developed or see if it's still in good condition, see if the color has changed at all.
I try to start over with each project or painting and try to teach myself the way to make that project usually kind of out of whole cloth. I've always had studio assistants helping me, gesso, different things, because I've worked really large and it's hard to move the paintings around, so I've always needed someone around to like help me move it from the floor to the wall. Usually a lot of them are artists like Scott Reeder, Jonas Wood. So like when you're making these big giant paintings that are like big monochrome fields of a stain or paint, you have to kind of keep painting it while it's wet, or you'll have a dry mark. So you have to have 2 or 3 people doing it really fast so that it stays. So I've always had people, I've always had help. One of the problems I have with making art is that I get very involved in every aspect. So if I say yes to anything, I'm extremely involved in everything. So even if I'm not physically doing it, I want to know how it's being done. That's like with the silk screen here. And then I'll try to monkey with it. So I like try to get into the process and mess with it or modify it. So it's never so straightforward that I just let go. I've been thinking about conservation a little bit because I've noticed some of the whites from a series of paintings that I made in 2013 or 14 started to yellow, and it was mainly because the paintings were immediately put in crates after they were shown for like 3 days or something, so they never cured in sunlight. I've thought about conservation. I remember going to one of these places in Germany where they had all this quattrocentral painting, and you could tell the same conservator took all the varnish off and put all new varnish on, like 50 paintings at the same time. And it just made it look like you were looking at a solo show of paintings, even though it was like spanning like 100 years. So I was like, oh my God, this is a conservation nightmare. They've destroyed all these paintings by applying the same technique to this couple hundred years of painting. Most works have several different sheens, several different textures, several different types of paint that have been used, or different mediums have been used but it's about the differences. It's about one being dry, one being glossy, one being thick, one being thin, one looking like a resin, one looking like a stain. I'll have dry, matte acrylic paint, and then some glossy oil paint, and then some waxy oil paint, and then raw canvas. So it's about those differences. So yeah, the example I'm giving, where those just one surface has been glossed over, that would destroy my work if you were to seal it in some varnish, because these differences are important that you see in the texture. I think there's a general character to a painting. Like with these paintings that I'm talking about, with the whites, the cools, like the cool pinks and blues in these paintings reference to sort of artificiality, an artificial color, not a fleshy color, not a organic color. And suddenly, all of a sudden, all the colors in the painting looked earthy and organic, and I'm like, that's not what I intended. I'm like, now we've gone from the manufactured world to the organic world, and that's not what the flavor of the painting was. So that's why I felt like I wanted to change it. But subtle color shifts that don't change them, like, kind of meaning. I think as long as the cools are cool and the warms are warm and you didn't just lose those differences, then a little bit of change is fine. I haven't had that many conservation issues. Like, it's actually been pretty easy to clean the paintings, especially when they're primed really well. The raw canvas is probably a little difficult. The most difficult has been this Don Edwards matte paint from the early years that I used, because it's so matte, and there's like a couple of them that are very dark, and the brown, like a fingerprint on it, just looks really glossy because the oil just like stands way out, and you can't. With matte paint, you can't touch it up because any other layer on it just shows up as a touch-up. So you have to either you have to leave it, you can't, or you have to repaint the entire thing. I generally don't think everything should stay white, and clean and super pristine, but I do think some things just truly alter the way the picture looks. When there's giant color shifts, I think if I'm still alive, I would want to look at it and maybe change it.